I never expected Antarctica to feel watched. In 1953, we were told the ice was empty, just wind, snow, and silence. But silence doesn't leave footprints. I'm recording this now because the men who stood beside me are gone, and the report we filed was buried under stamped red ink. They said the tracks outside our airfield were from equipment. They said exhaustion causes hallucinations. But no machine walks on two legs, and no storm leaves prints that circle a base like it's hunting. What we saw out there was older than the ice, and it knew we were trespassing. This testimony was never meant to exist, but some truths refuse to stay frozen. Welcome to Combat Lore Files, where the shadows of war live on. Hit subscribe and get nightly drops of stories like this. They told us nothing could live here, but the ice didn't feel dead. It felt alert. I arrived in Antarctica in 1953 aboard a C-124 Globemaster that screamed like a wounded animal as it fought the wind. The cargo bay smelled of fuel, cold metal, and stale sweat, the kind of smell that settles into your clothes and follows you home, if you ever make it home. I was a U.S. Air Force logistics specialist, trained to count crates, track fuel, and keep men supplied in places no one wanted to be. Operation Deep Freeze, they called it. Science support, weather stations, strategic presence. That's what the briefing said. None of it prepared me for the moment the rear ramp dropped and the Antarctic air punched the breath out of my lungs like a living thing. It wasn't just cold. It was hostile. The kind of cold that doesn't bite. It presses slowly, patiently, like it knows you'll break eventually. The airfield looked temporary, almost embarrassed to exist. Aluminum huts half buried in snow, antenna masts rattling in the wind, runway markers barely visible beneath drifting ice. Everything was painted in dull military colors that disappeared against the white, as if the base was trying not to be noticed. My boots crunched onto the ice with a sound too loud for a place that's silent. No birds, no insects, just wind and the low, constant hum of generators fighting a losing battle against the cold. I remember thinking it felt less like arriving somewhere and more like intruding. A master sergeant named Hargreave met us at the edge of the runway. His beard was frosted white, not from age, but from hours spent outside. He didn't smile, didn't welcome us. He just checked our names against a clipboard and waved us toward the barracks. "Don't wander," he said, voice flat, like it was a safety instruction he'd repeated too many times. "The ice doesn't forgive mistakes." I laughed back then, nervous laughter, the kind men use when they don't want to look scared. Hargreave didn't laugh with me. Inside the barracks, the heat hit like a slap. The walls groaned as the wind pushed against them, and somewhere nearby metal clanged in a steady rhythm, like something knocking from the outside. I stowed my gear and joined the others in the mess hall. Coffee was boiling, thick and bitter, poured from dented steel urns. Men sat hunched over tables, speaking in low voices. These weren't fresh recruits. These were veterans of earlier rotations, faces worn raw by cold and isolation. They watched us like we were replacements for men who hadn't made it back. One of them, a mechanic with cracked knuckles and eyes that never stopped moving, leaned toward me. "You hear it yet?" he asked. I told him hear what? He shook his head slowly. "Give it time. Antarctica talks, just not with words." The others at the table fell silent. No one laughed. No one contradicted him. That should have been my first warning. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind howled around the barracks, rising and falling like breathing. Radio static crackled faintly through the walls, broken by distant voices calling out weather data, coordinates, routine check-ins. Normal military sounds, but distorted, stretched thin by distance and ice. Every so often, the lights flickered, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift, not like tricks of light, but like something adjusting its position. I told myself it was nerves. New assignment, new environment. That's what training was for, to teach you to ignore instincts when they got inconvenient. The next morning, I stepped outside before sunrise. The sky was a deep, bruised blue, the horizon barely distinguishable from the ground. The runway stretched out ahead, a dark scar carved into endless white. Frost clung to everything, turning cables and ladders into jagged shapes. As I walked, I noticed something wrong. Not immediately, but slowly, the way your mind resists bad news. The snow near the edge of the runway wasn't smooth. It was disturbed, pressed down in long, uneven impressions. At first I thought it was vehicle tracks, maybe a tractor or supply sled. But these weren't parallel. They came in pairs, too wide apart, too deep. Hargreave appeared beside me without a sound. "Don't stare," he muttered. "Ice shifts. Wind plays tricks." I looked at him, then back at the impressions. They curved away from the runway, disappearing into the fog. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 1, 2, like footsteps, big ones. Hargreave's jaw tightened. "Get to work," he said. "You'll learn something quick out here. Antarctica isn't empty. It's patient." He walked off before I could ask what he meant. As the day went on, the wind picked up. Snow drifted across the runway in slow waves, erasing the impressions like they'd never been there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the ice was correcting itself, hiding something it had accidentally revealed. By afternoon, the temperature dropped even further, and the metal under my gloves burned like dry ice. Radios crackled with brief reports of equipment malfunctions, compass errors, readings that didn't line up with yesterday's data. Small things, explainable things, the kind of anomalies you log and forget. That evening, as I stood at the edge of the airfield watching the fog roll in, I noticed the ice near the runway again. It looked different, subtly warped, like pressure had been applied from below. I blinked, told myself it was the light, but the feeling crept back, heavier this time. The certainty that the ground beneath us wasn't just frozen water and rock. It was a surface, and surfaces, I was about to learn, can be crossed from either side. That I thought their words were nerves, until the ice around the runway began to change. By morning, the storm was gone, but something had walked through it. The blizzard hit sometime after midnight, hard enough to shake the barracks and bury sound under layers of wind and snow. I remember waking to the walls groaning, metal joints screaming as if the base itself wanted to tear loose and run. The generators dipped twice before stabilizing, and for a few seconds the lights went out completely. In that darkness, I had the strangest sensation that the silence outside wasn't empty anymore. Felt occupied. When morning came, the storm retreated as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving the air unnaturally clear, the sky pale and endless. The kind of calm that doesn't feel like relief, it feels like aftermath. I was part of the first detail sent to inspect the runway. Snowdrifts had piled high along the edges, and the wind had carved the surface into sharp ridges that cut through gloves if you weren't careful. My breath fogged instantly, freezing to my scarf. As we spread out, scanning for damage, I saw Hargreave stop dead. He didn't curse, didn't signal. He just stared at the ground in front of him like he was looking at a body. I followed his gaze, and that was when I saw them. The tracks started just beyond the runway markers, pressed deep into the snow like the ice had softened to accept the weight. They weren't dragged. They weren't scattered. Each impression was clean, deliberate, and spaced with intent. 2 long depressions side by side, each one longer than my forearm, wider than my chest. They sank so deep that the packed snow at the bottom had cracked, radiating fractures outward. I crouched instinctively, my gloved hand hovering inches above one print, afraid to touch it. It wasn't melted. It wasn't collapsed. It was compressed. Whatever made it had stood there. Someone behind me whispered, "Jesus Christ," and immediately went silent. We traced the line of prints as they moved away from the airstrip, crossing wind-sculpted drifts without slipping, without breaking stride. No machine moved like that. No animal we knew left tracks that upright. The spacing suggested balance, control, awareness. I felt a cold deeper than the temperature crawl up my spine as the realization set in that these tracks hadn't wandered. They had approached, then circled, then left. Cameras came out before orders did. A corporal snapped 3 photos before a lieutenant slapped the device out of his hands. The sound echoed too loud in the open air. "That's enough," the lieutenant barked, already pale beneath his frostburn. No documentation, no discussion. Hargreave backed him up without question, ordering us to smooth the area, break the edges, scatter snow until the impressions looked like nothing more than storm damage. As I worked, shoveling snow into something that felt like a grave, I kept glancing outward, half expecting to see new tracks forming behind us, as if whatever made them was watching us clean up its footprints. By midday, Command issued a formal briefing. Weather anomaly, ice expansion, optical illusion caused by wind erosion and low-angle light. The words were clean, practiced, and meaningless. We were instructed to forget what we'd seen. Anyone who had taken photographs surrendered film on the spot. Radios crackled as confirmation came in from Washington. Classified, restricted, non-event. That was the term they used. Non-event. I remember thinking how strange it was to name something so aggressively, like saying it enough times would make it true. Later that afternoon, I was assigned to inventory supplies near the civilian science tents. That's where I met Dr. Larson, a geologist seconded from Norway. His face weathered in a way that had nothing to do with age. He watched me struggle with a frozen crate and offered help, his English careful but clear. When I mentioned the storm, his eyes flicked toward the airfield, then back to me. "You saw them," he said quietly. Not a question, a statement. I froze, heart hammering, scanning for anyone within earshot. "Saw what?" I replied too quickly. Larson gave a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "The old stories say the ice remembers weight," he said, "especially weight that should not be there." That night, a small group of scientists gathered in the mess, speaking in low voices, switching languages when soldiers passed too close. I caught fragments, words like guardians, watchers, things beneath. One of them mentioned indigenous accounts passed down by seal hunters who refused to travel inland. Another spoke of shapes seen during early expeditions, dismissed as polar madness. Larson leaned toward me once more and murmured, "Antarctica is not uninhabited. It is restrained." Before I could ask what he meant, Hargreave entered the room, and the conversation died instantly. After lights out, I returned to the runway alone, against orders and better judgment. The wind had shifted again, smoothing the surface, hiding the evidence of the morning. But near the far edge, where the floodlights faded into darkness, I noticed something new. Fresh impressions, shallow but unmistakable, forming just beyond where we had cleared earlier. They hadn't been there an hour ago. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing the storm hadn't brought the tracks. It had covered them, and whatever had walked through the night had no intention of staying hidden. We were told to erase the evidence. But the tracks didn't stop appearing. The ice doesn't just cover things, it keeps them quiet. By the third day after the storm, the base stopped feeling temporary and started feeling restrained, like it was being held together by rules we didn't understand. Instruments failed in small, irritating ways at first. Wind gauges froze despite heating coils. Seismic sensors pinged without cause, then went dead. Compasses twitched when carried too close to the ice beyond the perimeter, their needles shivering like they were undecided about which way north really was. Command blamed the cold. The cold was always convenient, but the scientists stopped smiling, and the dogs, those tough, thick-furred sled teams that had hauled men across worse terrain, refused to sleep. I noticed it during the night watch. The dogs would whine softly, rising in pitch until handlers had to physically restrain them. They didn't bark. They stared, all of them facing the same direction, eyes locked on the white void beyond the floodlights, ears flat, bodies rigid. I followed their gaze more than once, scanning the darkness for movement, for shadow, for anything at all. There was nothing, and that was the problem. The emptiness felt staged, like a curtain drawn too carefully. It was Dr. Larson who finally spoke plainly. We were in the equipment shed, pretending to inventory cables while the wind hammered the walls. He kept his voice low, steady, as if he were discussing weather patterns instead of folklore older than any flag. He told me the Norse word first, then the English approximation. Ice walkers, giants that moved beneath and above the frozen world, tasked not with hunting men, but with guarding places never meant to be opened. He said the stories weren't myths in the way fairy tales were myths. They were warnings disguised as explanations. "You don't tell children the truth," he said. "You tell them a shape of the truth so they stay away." According to Larson, early polar expeditions had recorded similar disturbances. Tracks that appeared after storms, equipment failures clustered around certain coordinates, men reporting pressure in their heads like altitude sickness without the altitude. The reports were always buried, rewritten, attributed to stress or snow blindness. Antarctica rewarded skepticism, he said, because disbelief kept people alive. "The forbidden zones," he added, "are not marked on maps. They are felt." I asked him why we were here then, why the military would build an airfield on ground that legends warned against. Larson didn't answer directly. He just looked down through the ice at nothing and said, "Because something down there matters enough to risk angering what watches." That night, the sounds changed. The wind dropped to a whisper, and the silence pressed in so hard my ears rang. I lay awake listening to the slow tick of cooling metal, the distant hum of generators, the soft whine of radio static bleeding through the walls. Somewhere outside, snow shifted, not sliding, not drifting, but settling under weight. I held my breath, counting seconds. No footsteps, no crunch, just pressure as if the ground itself was being tested. The dogs lost control around midnight. They lunged against their tethers, howling now, throats raw with fear. Floodlights flared brighter as guards rushed the perimeter, rifles raised, fingers white on triggers. I joined them, my boots sinking into snow that felt denser than it should have been. Beyond the lights, the darkness looked thicker, almost layered. The dogs strained toward it, then recoiled as one, tails tucked, bodies low, as if something had stepped too close for comfort. One of the handlers dropped to his knees, swearing, convinced a polar bear was out there. But bears breathe, bears move. Whatever had the dog's attention made no sound at all. Later, inside the command hut, instruments spiked simultaneously. Seismic readouts jumped, then flattened. Radios filled with static so dense it sounded like wind screaming through tunnels. A pilot swore he saw movement on the far end of the runway, something tall passing between floodlights without breaking the beams. Command ordered a stand-down, then a lockdown. No one went outside unless ordered. No one spoke over open channels. The word anomaly was used again, stretched thin with overuse. I found Larson near the edge of the science tents just before dawn, staring at the ice like it might speak back if he waited long enough. He told me the final part of the folklore then. The ice walkers weren't monsters. They were measures. When balance was disturbed, when men dug too deep, flew too low, built where they shouldn't, the walkers surfaced. Not to attack, to remind. "They leave marks," Larson said. "So you know you were seen." As the light crept back over the horizon, I noticed shallow impressions forming beyond the floodlights, faint but undeniable, as if something immense had paused there, considering us. Legends are easy to dismiss until something answers back. The night the lights died, the ice finally came to claim its due. The blackout began without warning, not even the courtesy of a flicker. One moment the floodlights held back the darkness. The next they vanished, swallowed whole, leaving the base exposed under a sky choked with storm clouds. Generators failed in sequence, their steady hum collapsing into silence, so complete it felt violent. Wind rushed in to fill the void, howling through antenna masts and loose panels like something celebrating. Emergency klaxons wailed briefly, then cut off mid-note. Whatever had happened hadn't just shut us down. It had decided how quiet we were allowed to be. I was on perimeter duty when the radios died. The handset in my grip hissed once and went dead, heavier in my palm than it should have been. Visibility dropped to nothing as snow surged sideways, needling into every seam of my gear. Shapes vanished beyond arm's length. Training took over. I moved to my assigned sector by memory, counting steps, orienting myself by the faint outline of the runway buried under drifting white. Somewhere to my left, a man shouted my name, his voice torn apart by the wind. Then even that was gone. The silence between gusts was worse. In those brief lulls, I could hear something else. Not movement, not breath, but pressure. The sense that the air itself was being displaced slowly, deliberately. My pulse hammered in my ears as I raised my rifle, knowing how useless it would be against anything big enough to bend sound around it. The storm thickened, snowflakes clumping into heavy sheets that blurred distance and depth. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of light, a shadow thrown wrong by the emergency beacons struggling to reboot. Then it moved. Not fast, not with urgency. It shifted its weight, and the ground responded. A towering silhouette emerged against the storm, darker than the darkness behind it, tall enough that its head vanished into the blowing snow. It stood upright, proportions wrong for any man, too balanced for an animal. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its attention like a hand pressed against my chest. I didn't fire, couldn't. Every instinct screamed that violence would be a mistake, the kind you don't get to apologize for. The figure took a step forward, then another, each movement measured, testing the surface like someone checking thin ice. Snow didn't scatter beneath it, compressed. The storm seemed to bend around its outline, wind breaking against an unseen mass. For a moment, just one, I was certain it could see me as clearly as I could see it. Then a gust tore through, and the silhouette dissolved back into the white, leaving only the echo of its presence. The blackout lasted less than 10 minutes. When the generators roared back to life, floodlights snapped on in a staggered wave, revealing an empty perimeter and a base full of shaken men pretending not to look at one another. Command demanded reports. Words failed us. No one wanted to be the first to say what couldn't be logged. The official record noted weather interference and electrical overload. Unofficially, every man there knew the storm hadn't caused the failure. It had taken advantage of it. At dawn, we were ordered to sweep the perimeter. The storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean and painfully bright. That's when we saw the pattern. Tracks, deep and precise, encircled the airfield at a consistent distance, equidistant from the runway and structures. Not random, not wandering, a boundary. Each impression matched the size and depth of the silhouette steps from the night before. I walked the circle slowly, counting paces, realizing it was perfect, no deviation, no overlap. A line drawn in snow and ice, marking where we were allowed to exist. No one spoke as the realization settled in. This wasn't surveillance. There was no attempt at concealment, no effort to approach unnoticed. The message was deliberate and unmistakable. We had been contained, not protected. When I looked up from the tracks, I caught Larson watching from the edge of the science tents, his expression not fearful, but resigned. He met my eyes and gave a small, almost apologetic nod, like someone who had hoped the old stories were wrong. Command moved quickly after that. Flights were delayed. Certain zones were declared off-limits without explanation. Men were reassigned, rotated out, replaced with fresh faces who hadn't seen the circle yet. But the shape stayed with me, burned into my thoughts as clearly as it was etched into the snow. That night wasn't about threat. It was about assessment. Whatever walked our perimeter wasn't deciding how to destroy us. It was deciding whether we were worth tolerating. That was the moment we realized we weren't being observed, we were being measured. They didn't come to investigate what happened. They came to control what we were allowed to remember. The aircraft arrived without notice, a dark shape cutting through the pale sky long before its engines reached us. No scheduled flight, no radio chatter ahead of time, just the low, steady roar of authority descending onto ice that had already made its point. I watched from the edge of the runway as the plane taxied in, its markings too clean, its crew too composed for men flying into the end of the world. When the ramp dropped, the cold didn't slow them the way it slowed us. They moved with purpose, boots hitting the ice like they already owned it. High command doesn't travel this far south unless something has gone wrong, or something has gone right in a way no one else is supposed to notice. The officers who stepped down wore expressions carved from briefing rooms and closed-door meetings. No curiosity, no surprise, just confirmation. One of them, a colonel with eyes like polished stone, surveyed the airfield, the surrounding ice, the faint scars left by the circle even after wind had tried to erase it. His gaze lingered there a moment too long. Then he nodded, as if seeing exactly what he expected. We were assembled within the hour. No questions allowed. No discussion. The incident, never referred to directly, was classified as a geological anomaly compounded by extreme weather conditions. Those words were repeated verbatim, like a prayer meant to ward something off. Any deviation from that explanation would be considered a breach of operational security. The colonel's voice never rose, never wavered. He didn't need to threaten us. The implications were heavy enough to bend the air. Men who had spoken too openly over the last few days were quietly pulled aside. Not arrested, not accused, just reassigned. A transfer here, an early rotation there. One by one, familiar faces vanished from the mess hall, their bunks cleared out with surgical efficiency. No goodbyes, no explanations. Felt less like punishment and more like quarantine. As if ideas themselves were contagious. Construction began that same afternoon. Heavy equipment was flown in at impossible speed. Machines that had no business operating in this environment suddenly roaring to life as if the ice welcomed them. The site was chosen beyond the runway, just past where the perimeter circle had been most defined. Officially, it was a maintenance hangar. Unofficially, no one was fooled. I was assigned to logistics support, which meant I saw the manifests before they were altered. Reinforced steel. Insulation rated for pressures far beyond structural necessity. Anchoring systems designed not just to hold against wind, but against upward force. They cut into the ice with heated drills, steam rising in thick columns that blocked the view. Guards were posted at every angle, rifles slung but never lowered. The scientists weren't allowed near the site anymore. Larson stood at a distance with the others, hands clenched, watching something ancient be disturbed by men who thought classification equaled control. I caught his eye once. He shook his head slowly, a gesture heavy with inevitability. Whatever they found beneath the surface wasn't brought out in the open. It stayed where it was, entombed under layers of steel and concrete as the hangar took shape above it. But I felt it even without seeing it. A pressure in the skull, a faint vibration through the soles of my boots whenever I passed too close. Instruments went haywire within a certain radius, despite recalibration. Radios filled with static only near the site, as if sound itself struggled to cross an invisible boundary. At night, the dogs refused to go near the hangar. They pulled back hard enough to choke themselves, whining low and desperate. The handlers stopped trying. Some things you don't force. The floodlights around the structure burned brighter than anywhere else on base, casting hard shadows that twisted unnaturally against the snow. More than once, I thought I saw movement where there shouldn't have been any, shifts in shadow that didn't match the wind, distortions that suggested depth where there should have been flat ground. The colonel visited the site on the third night. He stood alone at the edge of the hangar, gloved hand resting against the cold metal, head tilted slightly as if listening. I realized then that this wasn't a discovery. It was a retrieval or a reinforcement. The language of the orders, the speed of the response, the certainty with which decisions were made all pointed to one conclusion. This place was never unknown. It had simply been unattended. When the hangar doors finally sealed, the sound echoed across the ice like a lid snapping shut. Something about that noise settled deep in my chest, an instinctive understanding that whatever lay beneath hadn't been imprisoned. It had been acknowledged. The base returned to routine on paper. Flights resumed. Logs were cleaned. The anomaly was filed away. But nothing felt neutral anymore. We weren't explorers or builders. We were caretakers standing watch over something that predated our presence and would outlast it. As I lay awake that night, listening to the distant hum of reinforced walls and the muted groan of ice beneath them, one thought refused to let go. We hadn't stumbled onto a secret. We had been sent to it. Whatever we uncovered, command already knew it was there. I learned that day the ice doesn't chase, you walk into it. The evacuation drill was supposed to be routine, a test of response time under whiteout conditions. The kind of exercise commanders love because it looks good in reports and keeps men busy. Sirens wailed just after noon, their sound flattened by wind and swallowed by blowing snow. Visibility dropped to nothing within minutes. The world erased down to a few feet of gray haze. I pulled my goggles tight, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that came whenever the weather turned violent. We moved in teams toward the runway, following guidelines buried under fresh snow, boots striking ice we could no longer see. The air felt wrong, not colder, heavier. Each breath took effort, like inhaling underwater. Radios crackled with broken fragments of orders, then dissolved into static. I remember thinking how quiet my own footsteps sounded, muffled as if the ground was absorbing them. The drill coordinator shouted something I couldn't make out, and then the line ahead of me stopped moving. Men froze in place, heads turning, bodies tense in a way training couldn't explain. That's when the pressure hit. Not a push, not a blow, more like the sudden awareness of mass nearby, bending space without touching it. The wind shifted sharply, curling around something invisible. An instinct dragged my eyes upward. Through the whiteout, a shape resolved itself slowly, as if the storm was reluctant to reveal it. Tall, too tall. Its outline wasn't sharp, but its presence was undeniable, filling the space in front of me until the air felt thin and strained. It stood on the runway, where the ice was hardest, and yet the surface seemed to yield beneath it. I couldn't hear it move. No crunch, no scrape, just that unbearable pressure, like standing too close to a loaded artillery piece before it fires. The thing was upright, balanced, its proportions suggesting intent rather than instinct. I couldn't see a face, but I knew, absolutely, that it was aware of us. Of me. My rifle felt absurd in my hands. I didn't raise it. No one did. The entity shifted slightly, and the motion displaced snow in slow, deliberate waves. It wasn't advancing. It was aligning itself as if matching some internal reference point. For a terrifying second, I thought of the hangar, of the sealed ground beneath it, and understood that this encounter wasn't accidental. We had stepped into a space it considered active. The drill disintegrated. Orders meant nothing. Men backed away without turning, guided by pure survival instinct. The shape remained where it was, unmoving, allowing us to retreat. That mercy, if that's what it was, felt worse than aggression. As the whiteout thickened, the entity faded from view, swallowed again by snow and wind, leaving only the echo of its weight behind. We regrouped hours later inside the base, shaken and silent. One man was missing, Private Ellis, last seen near the outer edge of the runway during the drill. Search teams went out despite protests from the scientists and tight-lipped approval from command. I joined one, moving beyond the floodlights into territory that now felt distinctly forbidden. The storm had eased, revealing a pale, endless horizon that made distance meaningless. We found Ellis's tracks first. They led away from the runway in a straight line, unbroken, as if he had walked calmly into the white. No signs of struggle, no drag marks, just footsteps that gradually grew farther apart, deeper until they stopped. Not faded, stopped. The final impression was crushed so deeply into the ice that cracks spidered outward. Beyond it, nothing. No return tracks, no disturbance. It was as if he had been lifted straight up or pressed straight down. Command called off the search within minutes. Exposure, they said. Disorientation. Another tragedy attributed to the environment. But no one there believed that. The dogs refused to approach the last track, whining and pulling away until their handlers gave up. I stood at the edge of that final impression, staring into the ice, realizing how clean the disappearance was. Efficient, purposeful. That night, the hangar's lights burned through the dark without interruption. Guards doubled, orders tightened. We were instructed to avoid the runway unless absolutely necessary. The phrase "whiteout encounter" never appeared in any report. Ellis's bunk was cleared before morning, his name removed from duty rosters as if subtraction could erase the space he'd occupied. I lay awake listening to the wind scrape across reinforced walls, thinking about how the entity hadn't followed us, hadn't needed to. It had demonstrated reach without pursuit, authority without violence. The runway, once our lifeline, now felt like a boundary we crossed at its discretion. Whatever walked there wasn't reacting to us anymore. It was responding to something deeper, something we had disturbed and tried to bury under steel. By the time dawn crept back over the ice, the mission had changed, even if no one said it out loud. We were no longer here to study, supply, or endure. We were here to make sure nothing else came through. After that, survival stopped being the mission, containment was. Some reports are buried because paper can't survive the weight of what really happened. The dismantling began quietly, the way all denials do. One aircraft at a time, one tent emptied, one name erased from the duty board. Officially, the reduction was due to logistical strain and environmental risk. Unofficially, everyone knew the ice had issued terms. Half the base was scheduled for closure within weeks. The science teams rotated out under the guise of funding cuts. Their research boxed and sealed before it could be argued over. The hangar remained. It always remained. A dark, immovable shape against the white, guarded day and night. Its presence unacknowledged in every written order. The reports we filed were rewritten before the ink dried. Ellis's disappearance became a crevasse incident, despite there being no crevasses near the runway. Equipment failures were attributed to thermal stress. Psychological evaluations were mandated not to help us but to catalog us. Men who spoke too vividly were flagged. Men who asked the wrong questions were transferred north with unusual speed. Silence was rewarded. Compliance was praised. Memory, it turned out, was the real liability. Sleep became the enemy. When it came, it brought dreams that felt less like imagination and more like intrusion. I dreamt of standing on glass, looking down into endless blue darkness, aware of something vast moving beneath, never surfacing, never leaving. Others reported the same sensation without prompting. Pressure in the chest, the certainty of being observed from below. One mechanic woke screaming that the ice had opened its eye. Another swore he heard footsteps beneath the floor of the barracks, pacing in slow circles. No one laughed anymore. The dogs were evacuated early. Official reason, safety. Real reason. They wouldn't stop facing the hangar. Once they were gone, the nights felt emptier, quieter in a way that sharpened the mind. Without their warning, the base felt exposed, stripped of its last instinctual defense. The wind returned to its old patterns, but now every gust sounded intentional. Even routine maintenance felt ceremonial, like we were maintaining an altar rather than equipment. I was assigned to assist with final sealing procedures. The hangar doors were reinforced again, layers added to layers, locking mechanisms tested and retested. No one asked what we were sealing against, escape or intrusion. When the final welds were laid down, the vibration traveled through the ice and into my bones. For a moment, I thought I felt something answer back, not in anger, but acknowledgement. The pressure eased after that, like a held breath released. Larson left on the second-to-last flight. Before he boarded, he pressed a small notebook into my hand. "For when they say it never happened," he said. It contained fragments, translated folklore, expedition logs, marginal notes connecting stories separated by centuries. Patterns repeating, guardians appearing when thresholds were crossed. He didn't ask me to protect it. He knew that was already impossible. When my own rotation came, I felt no relief. Departure felt premature, like abandoning a watch before being dismissed. As the aircraft lifted off, I looked down at the shrinking shapes of the base, the hangar a dark scar against the ice. For a brief instant, the clouds parted, and I imagined I saw a ring etched faintly around the airfield. Still intact, still precise. A boundary holding. Back home, the cold followed me. Not physically, psychologically. I woke some nights convinced the floor beneath my bed was too thin, that something vast was moving just out of reach, patient as ever. Other men reached out over the years, their voices strained, asking if I still dreamed of pressure and silence. Some drank themselves into quiet. Some vanished into institutions. A few took their own lives, leaving notes that spoke of eyes beneath ice, of being measured and found lacking. The records remain classified, locked behind language designed to neutralize meaning. Future crews would come and go, unaware of what slept beneath reinforced steel, believing Antarctica to be empty because they were told it was. But legends don't require witnesses to persist. They require survivors. And we survived just enough to remember. The ice reclaimed the base, but it didn't reclaim the story. Some ice melts, some remembers, and some remembers you. Decades have passed since Antarctica released me back into the world. Yet I still feel its weight in quiet moments, when the air grows still and the ground beneath my feet feels too solid to be trusted. I'm an old man now, my service reduced to a line in a government archive that no one is allowed to open. But the story didn't stay buried the way they hoped. It slipped out sideways, carried in whispers between polar crews, shared over lukewarm coffee in distant stations by men who swore they felt watched even when the horizon was empty. They never mention our base by name. They don't have to. The ice remembers locations the way men remember scars. I first realized the legend had outlived us when a young engineer wrote to me in the late 70s, having somehow found my name through redacted reports and coincidence. He asked if I'd ever heard of the walkers. He described pressure during whiteouts, equipment failures near certain coordinates, dogs refusing to face the dark. He thought he was losing his mind. Reading his letter, my hands shook harder than they ever had in the cold. Nothing we experienced was unique. It was recurring, cyclical, as if Antarctica allowed intrusion only in measured doses, correcting itself whenever balance tipped too far. Over time, the stories sharpened. Pilots spoke of runways that felt wrong beneath their wheels, of moments where lift lagged as if the air itself resisted departure. Scientists joked nervously about zones where data never aligned twice the same way. A few old-timers referred to sleeping ground, places you didn't drill, didn't land, didn't question. No official maps marked these areas, but everyone seemed to know where they were. Memory, I learned, doesn't need documentation to persist. It embeds itself in behavior. I returned to cold climates once, years later, on a civilian contract that took me no farther south than Alaska. Even there, when the snow fell just right, I felt it, that familiar compression in the chest, the sense of standing on a surface that was aware of me. I understood then what Larson meant. Antarctica wasn't hostile. It was selective. It didn't hunt or rage. It endured, cataloged, responded, like a librarian guarding shelves older than language, allowing readers only so close before reminding them the books were not theirs to take. The hangar still exists as far as I know, not as a structure anyone acknowledges, but as a necessity quietly maintained by rotations of men who are told just enough to do their jobs and not enough to ask why. Perhaps nothing moves beneath it anymore, or perhaps it never needed to. Guardians don't require constant motion to fulfill their purpose. Sometimes presence alone is enough. I've spent years wondering whether the entity we encountered was singular or representative, a sentinel or merely one of many. The folklore suggests the latter. That thought doesn't frighten me the way it once did. There's comfort in the idea that the world still has boundaries we can't bulldoze with authority and steel. War teaches men they can impose order anywhere. Antarctica taught me the opposite. Some orders predate us. Some balances correct themselves without violence. As my dreams grow quieter with age, one image remains consistent. Not the silhouette, not the tracks, but the circle. Perfect, unbroken, drawn not to trap us but to define us. We were allowed inside it for a time, long enough to learn our scale. Long enough to understand that exploration without humility is just another form of invasion. If the story has a lesson, it isn't about monsters beneath the ice. It's about listening when a place tells you no. We came armed with science, logistics, and confidence, believing emptiness was an invitation. What we found was memory, patient, ancient, and unmoved by our need to conquer the unknown. Antarctica didn't punish us. It educated us, then waited for us to leave. I don't know how long the Guardians sleep or what wakes them. I only know that the ice keeps score, and it never forgets footsteps pressed too deep into its surface that we came believing we were explorers, but left knowing we were intruders. This story is inspired by real wartime reports, blended with folklore, and dramatized for narrative purposes.